Deadlock in the US as the president threatens years of government shutdown if he doesn't get money for his border wall. What is the face-off about the wall or the presidency? And how's it changing American politics? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Build that wall was a regular slogan from US President Donald Trump during and after his campaign. Now he's demanding over $5 billion from the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives to keep his promise. The Democrats have refused to give in, which has led to a partial government shutdown that began on December the 22nd. It's affecting nearly 800,000 government employees. The president has threatened to prolong the shutdown for months or even years. There's even talk of declaring a national emergency and bypassing Congress altogether. We'll bring in our guests in a moment, but first, Diane Easterbrook reports from Washington.
Vice President Mike Pence, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and close advisor, and Kirstjen Nielsen, who is the Secretary of Homeland Security, met for about 2 hours on Saturday afternoon with congressional aides talking about this government shutdown. The vice president said that these talks on Saturday were productive. However, President Trump tweeted that the two sides really didn't make much headway. Now, the vice president is going to be continuing these talks. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced that House Democrats are going to be meeting next week to pass individual appropriations bills that would reopen some agencies, including the Department of Treasury and the IRS, so the government could begin processing income tax returns and get income tax refunds back in the hands of Americans. Now, this shutdown, if it goes another week, that would be 3 weeks, and it would make it the longest shutdown in U.S. history.
Well, let's bring our guests into the show. We have joining us via Skype from Lubbock, Texas, Oliver McGee, a former senior White House advisor. In Washington, D.C., Sean Zeller, deputy editor of Congressional Quarterly magazine. And also joining us on Skype from Bethesda in Maryland, Alan Lichtman, professor of history at the American University. Good to have you all with us. If I could start with Alan then. So, what do you make of the situation as you read the political pulse right now, Alan? Are the two sides any closer to reaching some kind of resolution?
They don't seem to be very close at all. Here's the problem. Donald Trump believes that the building of the wall, or at least the symbolic building of the wall, because that's all that matters to him, is absolutely critical to his presidency. He believes that if he gives in, he is going to undermine his base, and his base is really all he cares about because he wants the adulation and support, and he's going to be excoriated by right-wing pundits like Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh. So he feels politically he can't give in. On the other hand, the Democrats believe that they have the upper hand here. The wall is not popular with the American people, and certainly the vast majority of the American people don't believe that the government ought to be shut down because of the wall. You know, we have a multi-trillion-dollar budget, and we've shut down the government over $5 billion.
I guess, Alan, supporters of the US president would say it's not really him who's shutting it down, it's the intransigence on the part of the Democrats.
Of course that's wrong. Clearly, he's the one who's made the demand that out of this multi-trillion-dollar budget, I've got to get my $5 billion or I'm going to shut down the whole government. And I don't care about the people because obviously all of those people think the wall is much more important than their paycheck. Of course, he completely fabricated it. He completely made it up. And by the way, it was Donald Trump who had a deal on the table that said he was going to sign, and then he got lambasted by Limbaugh and Coulter and changed his mind. How do you deal with someone who is being manipulated by Fox News?
All right. I'm sure I have a funny feeling Oliver's going to have a word or two to say about that. But before we come to you, Oliver, there's one point here I'd like to put to Sean. The idea that this could go on even for years, the US president said. Could it really?
I think it's unlikely because the president's not the only decision maker here. There's already a lot of pressure building in the Senate on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to go ahead and pass at least a continuing resolution to get government workers working again and paid again. Already 3 senators who are facing re-election in 2020, Susan Collins of Maine, Thad Tillis of North Carolina, and Cory Gardner of Colorado have said they'd like to see the government reopened. And so it's conceivable that if the pressure builds enough in the Senate, you could see a continuing resolution to open the government pass there over Donald Trump's veto, even if he refuses to sign it.
All right, let's bring in Oliver. I'm sure you heard a moment ago the comments there by Alan that this is really a crisis that the US president has manufactured in order to keep his base happy. Is that the sort of analysis you'd agree with?
Well, I think yesterday, and when we saw Donald Trump in the Rose Garden, he said 2 words that really shocked everyone: eminent domain. I did it. Trump can do it too. I established eminent domain to establish the interstate highway system, long stretches of highway to land aircraft and move military equipment in the event of a national emergency. So he threw that word out there. That shook everybody up. I think that stopped Nancy and Chuck for a moment. I think he does have that power because it goes back to William Blackstone and the common law, but even going back to the Magna Carta in 1215, that says that the president can establish eminent domain in the event of national urgency for life, liberty, and property, as long as he compensates for the taking of the property at the southern border to build a wall, for maintaining that constitutional principle. But at the same time, Alan is right. The purse strings reside in the Senate and in the House, and they can basically look and pull those strings as well. This is checks and balances in the works. This is an excellent opportunity for Americans to understand American history, but also look at English common law, where we do stand in the constitutional principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but also the life, liberty, and property. More importantly, what we have on the southern border is a military, but also humanitarian crisis. We've got 1.7 million pounds of drugs that are seized each year, $2.5 million of profit that are made by criminals and gangsters and terrorists. And then at the same time, we've got an 800,000 case backlog on asylum claims that largely are economically
I guess, Oliver, the opponents of the president would say the wall is not the way to deal with the problems of the border.
It's the worst way to deal with it. You're not going to deal with asylum seekers by building a wall. You've got to have if it's a humanitarian crisis, you have to have a humanitarian response. And the administration's response is absolutely just the opposite. And by the way, you know as well as I that the vast majority of drugs do not come, across these unwalled parts of the border. They come through ports of entry. And you know as well that at least half of the so-called undocumented immigrants in this country don't come across the southern border either, but are people who have overstayed their visas. Certainly a reasonable discussion on border security is needed.
We interrupted Oliver.
Occur under this, you give me my money or I'm going to shut down the entire government. And by the way,
let's give Oliver a chance.
Trump just promised to build a wall. He said Mexico was going to pay for it.
Let's give Oliver a chance.
And we know he made that up like he makes up everything.
All right, let's give Oliver a chance to continue the thought. Go ahead, Oliver.
Thank you. I'm just quoting the Department of Homeland Security, and I'm very, very sound on those statistics that I gave.
All those statistics were debunked by Politico.
Have an argument with the Department of Homeland Security at another time. That is essentially what we're trying to establish. I'm also saying that in the checks and balances, this is about the wall versus DACA. So what we have to do is to make sure that both sides get to the table, and this is what Donald Trump was saying in the Rose Garden, that he's giving that negotiation process a chance. If it breaks down, he can, through his executive powers, invoke eminent domain, and then that shuts everybody up.
All right, I'm interested in some of these points which we're now getting into. First of all, let me go to Sean and ask the question, is it possible that the Democrats can find a unilateral way out of this by passing bills to forcibly reopen government spending for some departments, at least?
The Democrats can't do that on their own because they don't control the Senate. So Mitch McConnell is a crucial figure here, the Senate Majority Leader from Kentucky. He has thus far stayed out of the fray. He said this is a matter of negotiation between the Democrats who lead the House, Nancy Pelosi of California, and Donald Trump.
So you don't think it's likely, Sean, they can find anyone on the Republican side of the aisle in the Senate that might be, you know, kind of sympathetic to the idea of reopening government if this drags on too long?
Well, as I mentioned before, you have Tom Tillis in North Carolina, you have Cory Gardner in Colorado, and Susan Collins of Maine, all seeking re-election, all expecting tough re-election races, all Republicans who do want to see the government reopened. So that pressure is building on McConnell, but McConnell controls the floor agenda. Democrats or Republicans who want to fund the government can't force him to bring appropriations bills to the floor. It's his decision.
Mm-hmm. Let's take the idea to Alan, which Oliver mentioned there, the idea of declaring eminent domain. I guess we're talking about a national emergency style scenario and force funding, you know, bypassing Congress.
Well, he probably could do that. The president does have broad powers to declare a national emergency. It would be an incredible dereliction of duty. We're talking about national emergencies. We're talking about things like World War II, existential threats to the survival of the nation. This is personal pique on the part of Donald Trump. And for him to overuse the powers of the presidency, to do something as drastic that is rarely done in American history, to declare a national emergency over a wall about which at least we can say the experts are absolutely divided whether it's going to do any good
or not. Who would challenge that, Alan? The courts?
Mexico was going to pay for. I'm not sure even this conservative Supreme Court would kind of sanction such an overreach of presidential power.
Let's bring Oliver back on that one. Do you agree that any attempt to declare a national emergency would probably run into trouble in the courts and not work out for Donald Trump?
The courts would back him because they're not going to go against the Magna Carta and they're not going to go against Blackstone common law. This is a very constructionist Supreme Court.
Magna Carta, come on.
And more importantly, I agree with my colleague. Mitch McConnell is the key card here. He holds all the power. No matter what the urgencies and the emotions of the House may do, the Senate is in Republican controls, and they are going to have most of the power to decide where this goes. Call Mitch McConnell the honest broker. He's very, very, very quiet, as my colleague said, rightly so, because when he decides, it's decided. But what Donald Trump is trying to do right now is negotiate and use the proper constructions of separations of powers to discuss with the legislature about his administrative possibilities and thinking. But make no bones about it. Eminent domain rests in his power, and that goes back into long-standing law of Blackstone and the Magna Carta of English law. So basically, he's very, very sound, and the court's not going to go against him on that.
Sean,
That's
feels like
pile of nonsense.
Go ahead, Alan. He wants to come in on this.
It's not going to guide the courts here. The U.S. Constitution will.
All right, let me bring Sean into this one. Who is going to win this one ultimately, do you think, Sean?
I think at the end of the day, the government will reopen. Perhaps there'll be a compromise where both sides are able to save face, where there's some additional money provided for border security, or perhaps the Republicans the pressure will just get too great. I mean, the pressure is going to mount during the month of January. During the month of January, federal employees, those 800,000 federal employees who are either not working or working without paychecks, are going to miss their first paycheck. And that's going to be a big moment, I think, in this, where the pressure builds to reach a resolution. And so I think we're looking probably at some time in January where it gets resolved either over the president's veto or with some face-saving compromise.
Sean, we've had shutdowns before, but in some aspects, does this one feel a little unprecedented? Does it feel like we're entering uncharted territory? We're hearing reports of some workers, government workers, calling in sick to look around for other jobs. It feels like there's a breaking down of confidence.
It definitely does feel different because Donald Trump is a different kind of president. He's, in his threat to keep the government shut down for months or years, it seems plausible. He's the sort of man, the sort of president who approaches politics from a different way. He prides himself on being a deal maker and putting pressure on his opponents in a deal to reach an agreement pleasing to him. And so it seems plausible that he could push the shutdown weeks or months or years. But of course, he's not the only decision maker here. There are the Republicans in the Senate who will have a say as well.
So, Alan, as you can hear there, Sean, as probably a lot of people believe that ultimately this is going to be worked out. But I'm wondering how much damage might be done to politics in the U.S., to the way of doing politics. Do you see some long-lasting effects from this whole episode over the wall?
I do, and they're very sad. I mean, we certainly do not want to see America devolve into a kind of country where we are willing to sacrifice the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of people simply because the Congress will not go along with a particular demand of a president of the United States. And we're not talking here about a demand that involves an existential threat to the country, that involves our survival, that involves our economic prosperity. We're really talking about a president who is involved in personal pique because he is being criticized by the right wing and needs to appeal to his base. Remember, he's turned down 2 deals already, including one that offered him $25 billion for broad border security. So it's going to be very difficult to negotiate with Donald Trump. But I hope that this approach, my way or everybody suffers, is going to be discredited rather than credited, and the harmful effects, both politically, psychologically, and substantively, are going to deter negotiating this way. This is no way to negotiate. This is no way to govern. This is a shame for the United States. And you know who's the winner here? The same winner from other Donald Trump policies, Vladimir Putin. God, he just loves to see the great American government shut down. They're passing the vodka around in Moscow and smiling and laughing.
I'm glad you mentioned, I'm glad you've taken us international. That segues beautifully into my next question, which I was going to say to Oliver on the point of credibility. How much concern should there be about what this sort of issue does to America's prestige, its international standing, when it's so internally focused on a division over an issue of budgets and walls?
Clearly, America First national security strategy that he's implementing has been taken abroad and tested. At Davos, has been tested across the G20 and the G8 summits. Basically, what this is about is international border security tied to economic interests, stress national incomes internationally. Basically, if we're going to have growth models that are stretching into the realms of 3%, 4%, 5% globally, we have to make sure that we have international borders secure in nationalism so that we don't have stressed international incomes.
But if there's so much domestic division over it, Oliver, to the point where government may be, it looks like we could be heading into a historical shutdown in terms of numbers of days. That can't be a good thing for U.S. international prestige, right?
Well, we went through it with Bill Clinton. I was there to watch it. It was about 3 weeks. If we go to 4, 5, 6 weeks, all the government workers are going to be furloughed and receive their checks eventually. The government pays its bills. I see the shutdown as a stage, but it's in the background to a larger issue about American sovereignty.
You know that.
So American sovereignty is very important because right now, above all, people want to protect Americanism and our culture. And I think that's what the bigger discussion is right now. I agree. This shutdown will be settled. It will be settled by the time we get to
Is there a consensus, though, Oliver? You speak as if there is a consensus over what is Americanism and American culture. It looks from the outside that there's a
culture. What does
division.
Food? Doesn't include people coming in from
question because I think that's a great question because I think Alan's going to be surprised at what I say. I am very, very prone to be in line with politics tied with demography shift. We are taking that right now. We're looking at that discussion right now. But when we start looking at demography shift in American politics, we really have to also have a conversation about American sovereignty. We have to find out what it is to be Americans and what is America. And we've got to make sure that we have good trade, fair trade, good sound tax policies, and then more importantly, how do we build the nation's infrastructure? Donald Trump is a builder, so he wants to build a wall, but he also wants to rebuild the American infrastructure, and it's crumbling. And more importantly, we may have a crumbling infrastructure physically, but we also have to have a discussion
about a pile of nonsense. He had the House, he had the Senate for 2 years, and he didn't do anything on infrastructure. The only thing he did was give a huge tax cut to the rich. Come on.
Alan, he's about to do it right now if you give Nancy a chance, because that's essentially what the Democrats.
Yeah. The same guy who shuts down the government over his personal peak is going to have these great policies that he couldn't get.
Let's give Oliver a chance to finish them briefly, Oliver. Go ahead.
Alan, if the Democrats keep arguing and fighting in emotionalism and get nothing done, they will be out of office in 2020.
Right.
And they will elect Donald Trump. This discussion about impeachment is ridiculous because it's going to basically kill everything that the House Democrats got in to do. They have to control that socialism because you've got to get something done. Taxes,
let's give Alan now a brief chance to get in with a brief word on that, Alan, before we go to Sean. Go ahead.
Yeah, Donald Trump had complete control of the government, and the only thing he did was reward his rich friends with an enormous tax cut, and to try to destroy the Affordable Care Act that provides health care essentially to tens of millions of Americans.
Right.
And this notion, that Donald Trump has these great policies that are going to benefit the average American is disproven by his own actions when he controlled government for 2 full years.
Okay,
and
you made that point, Alan. Let's give Sean a chance, can we, gentlemen? Because I think we've only got a couple of minutes left. Sean, listening to this discussion, you have to wonder, as well as the broader discussion going over, is this really just about a wall, or is this about the future of the White House? Oh,
absolutely not. This is Washington, D.C. This is about politics, pure and simple. The president has made the wall a make-or-break issue.
Why has he made that the make-or-break issue?
And his caustic approach to politics. Well, I think during his campaign, he was convinced that immigration was a salient issue for a lot of American voters, and his advisors suggested this idea of the wall as a simple
but he made a lot of claims and announcements during
his
campaign. We had other slogans, lock her up. I mean, he hasn't fallen through with everything. Why are we coming to this kind of standoff over this issue in particular?
Well, 2020 is only 22 months away, and we're in a permanent election cycle. A victory here on his wall will allow Donald Trump to say that indeed he is the deal maker, that his tough, caustic approach to deal making yields results. And Democrats don't want to give him that. And so I think this is about much more than $5 billion, a tiny drop in the bucket in our national budget. This is about the 2020 campaign and gearing up and setting the issues that will resonate with the public in 2020.
Interesting.
Isn't that shameful that the president is shutting down?
I know we can go on, guys. I know we can go on talking about this, and I'd love to as well. But unfortunately, we are out of time. Let's thank our guests very much for their thoughts. Guys, we'll come back and talk about this one again in the not-too-distant future, I'm sure. So let's thank our guests at this point for what's been a really interesting and feisty discussion. Oliver McGee, Sean Zeller, and Alan Lichtman. Thank you, too, for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. Or for further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching.